Yeah, I would just go like mother of all bull markets, if you will. Not like immediately because everybody's a genius right now. But I think that AI just has a special sauce for a little bit of everybody. Like your retail capital can see it, because I think most of these things are really driven by fear, and as much as they are greed, if not more. And seeing AI like, oh, it could take my job, it could go out and make me money is the greed side, but I think it's more mostly in the fear. Like if you think about what the last big bull market, right, 21, 22, it was like the debasement of the dollar. The dollar's going to shit, and that's really what drove a lot of stuff. I think it's basically the AI is going to replace us. Let's buy the intelligence platforms, the agents themselves. And I can see how that crescendos into a massive market, right? Like I don't think like 100 billion pounds sounds crazy. Doesn't seem too crazy.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sunny. I am an enterprise research analyst here at Messari, otherwise known as DeFi Monk on Twitter. Welcome to our podcast series, where we'll be focusing on covering the 2024 Messari annual theses. And we'll do this sector by sector. I helped co-author some sections of the crypto and AI thesis section. So that's what we'll be discussing today. In the spirit of the holiday season, we've decided to bring back some of Messari's renowned alumni. And so we have here today Dustin Teander and Seth Bloomberg, both previous research analysts here at Messari. Seth, we'll start with you and then we'll go to Dustin. Just quick introduction and what you guys are working on now.
Yeah, thanks, Sunny, for having me back. Good to see you. Yeah, so I was at Messari for about 3 years and covered a little bit of AI and crypto things while I was there. And yeah, since I've left, I've joined the Crucible Labs team, which is a validator on the Bittensor network. So helping them with the infrastructure side of things, but also on kind of subnet research and deciding how we ultimately want to set our allocations for talent missions on the network.
Awesome, man. I'm Dustin. I used to be at Messari as well. We also kind of worked with Seth for a long time. Focused on a lot of stuff, AI, DeFi, and left earlier this year. Kind of found an AI agent sort of platform. General thesis there being AI is kind of connecting technology that changes how information is even just moved throughout our systems and everything, and specifically focusing on crypto. Like how can we aggregate all of the information out there and use agents to basically transmit everything around. The platform is called The Veld, and we're going to roll out some of our agent stuff here.
Great. Yeah, no, I think both of you have been covering crypto and AI a lot longer than I have. But so excited to get into the discussion section of the pod. But just to kick things off, I'll briefly cover some of the main highlights of the AI and crypto section of our 2024 theses. And crypto and AI is really one of the upstart new sectors within crypto. I think if you look at the public markets, the total market cap of AI protocols grew from only just about 5 billion or so circulating market cap last year to over 50 billion in November. And of course, hundreds of millions of dollars in the private markets have been invested across the AI and crypto sector this year. And to highlight some of the bigger narrative trends that we saw in 2024, a lot of conversations around decentralized compute, which is helping to make homegrown model training more viable compared to alternative options, which is really just co-located centralized model training pioneered by mostly tech hyperscalers and large centralized players that have a ton of money to spend on CapEx. And the players that we've seen this year kind of enter this conversation are general decentralized compute, more deep-ish players like Akash and IONet, and also more AI-centric players like Jensen and Prime Intellect, really trying to focus on the AI part of decentralized compute and decentralized model training. Bittensor is, of course, the crypto and AI story of the year. It's the leading coordination platform, decentralized coordination platform for developing AI, and has certainly become crypto's proxy for what is possible in AI and crypto. There have been some noteworthy criticisms around Bittensor's subnet model, which we'll discuss a little bit later. But the protocol is basically the leader of the space. It's trading at a $12 billion plus FDV, and it's going to be transitioning into the dynamic TAO model to help address some of those concerns. And then, of course, at the end of the year, sort of in the late entry into the narrative cycle, are the AI agents. They've kind of become, the flavor of the month here in crypto, capturing just a ton of mindshare, specifically around agent KOLs and Twitter cult of personalities like Truth Terminal and ZeroBro. And that's also, drawn some focus onto AI simulation frameworks and platforms like Virtuals and Eliza. I think earlier in the year, we saw, AutoNolis and Wayfinder taking more of that attention. But all of the recent crop of agents that we've seen so far have been launched on new frameworks like virtuals. And so excited to see how that plays out going forward. And then, of course, the meme coins tied to these specific agents have really taken off. Looking forward into 2025 and beyond, we'll be watching Bittensor and Dynamic Tau. I think one of the things that we mentioned is whether the market decides to take more of a sum of the parts approach to valuing Bittensor in each of its subnets as these individual tokens roll out. And it remains to be seen whether Bittensor will be able to attract and retain top-level AI talent. I think that's kind of been the core discussion, the core hurdle for Bittensor to grow moving forward. For decentralized model training, we've seen Prime Intellect and News Research come out and publish new papers pioneering new concepts to make decentralized ML training more viable. And, Seth wrote a piece about how, it may be possible that we see decentralized training being adopted for both fine-tuning open source models, but also experimenting with smaller, more specialized models to compete with the frontier models that exist today. Or the AI agents has been kind of a deep clarification of the on-chain value proposition. Some of these tokens have been able to, or some of these agents have been able to launch tokens. They've been able to pay humans for services. We've been talking about all these things being far easier to do through crypto rails on-chain. And we think that with that in mind, we'll see more and more leading developers actually move to crypto to experiment with AI agents. The ease to drop a token, grow attention for your agent, and monetize it faster is, of course, a calling card as well. So that's something that we'll be watching out for. To kind of close things off here, I think open source AI versus closed source AI has been a big discussion, just broadly speaking. And crypto is showing, and I think we'll continue to see it show, that it will play a role on the open source side of that discussion. AI agents are mostly built off of open source AI. Players like Sentient have raised money to develop open source AI. Decentralized ML training makes it more viable. Bittensor has helped coordinate open source development. And so it appears likely that going into 2025 and beyond, we'll see crypto play a larger role within the open source side of that discussion. And so with that, let's get into the open discussion.
I mean, I would hit on the big stuff, Seth, as a Bittensor bull. It's hard. Let's just talk about dynamic Tau and how that's going to change things. I'd want to probably break down the AI stack in general, like where do certain protocols fit and what layers are we most excited about? And then obviously the agent stuff, I would just probably do those three. The agent, obviously unbiased. A lot of interesting stuff there and happening a lot more recently than dynamic Tau and Bittensor. So that's probably on top of people's minds.
That all sounds great. There's probably plenty to discuss within those like three broad topics. So
we could be here all day funding Bittensor.
Right. Watch out.
All right. So I think a good place to start off here with both of you is really just clarifying what you guys think the actual intersection of crypto and AI really is. And so Seth, maybe I'll start with you and then we'll go to Dustin, since you've literally written a report titled The Intersection of Crypto and AI. But when you look at the AI sector broadly, what do you think crypto kind of fits in?
It's a big question. So there's probably like different viewpoints to go at this question from. So like one is maybe like shorter term, one is maybe like longer term horizon. So, the way we've been thinking about it, at least like in the short term, is breaking down the AI stack and then thinking about how you can use the properties of crypto systems to build new companies or protocols in there. So you had mentioned earlier, like, I think like the more established ones are like compute protocols, right? So compute is obviously, in particular GPUs are a critical piece of AI infrastructure. So coordinating those across like different geographies, even like getting heterogeneous compute hooked up together is important for people that haven't had, access to these, to these pieces of hardware and infrastructure. So I think that's like broadly how I think about that. Maybe Dustin wants to go more into the stack itself, but I think that's like the short term. The way I think about it is like breaking down the AI stack, figuring out if there's like particular ways that crypto and the properties of crypto systems can enable new things or make things more efficient. And then like the longer term view, to me, it's sort of like how we think about like DeFi almost at this point. We don't really think about it as like crypto/finance anymore. It's like it's become much more integrated together. And it's like, there's this thing called DeFi. And I think at some point too, even with DeFi, like we're not even going to think of it as like DeFi, right? this is how you build financial systems and applications and financial services. And crypto is just like so intertwined. It's just like selecting a database or like some other piece of your stack because it makes sense for what you're building. So that's kind of how I think about that intersection.
I think the compute side was the first stuff to grab a lot of people's attention. I think that's where a lot of people's heads go to initially. I don't know if I particularly think that is like kind of where the main intersections are going to lie. But either way, I mean, just to maybe back up for a second and break down where I see the stack, I kind of got four main layers in my head. I've got that underlying compute layer, like literally what is the hardware that's running the AI models. That a layer right on top of that is kind of the AI models themselves, right? The training, getting the data, because there's just so much that goes into it. You got the pre-training, you got fine-tuning. There's a whole layer of stuff that goes in there and protocols and complementary type products that help out there. And then you got what I would, maybe a little high level, like cognitive layer, right? So you probably throw the agent stuff in here. So like agents, if you really break down what they're doing, all they're doing is calling the LLM multiple times and just stitching together the responses to effectively simulate thinking, right? Like we're going to call the LLM like, hey, what do we think about these tweets? And then might call another one to write a tweet, right? That's obviously super simplistic. But that's the thinking layer. It stitches the AI models together. And then on the top, you can just kind of large bucket of applications, right? So like applications that absorb AI or use the agents themselves. Like an example, popular one, like Cursor is a popular code editing tool. They've got an LLM, effectively agents plugged into the side that can read your code base and do tasks and stuff with you. It's like it's a product that people pay, $20 a month for. I see crypto plugging in everywhere there, right? Like I think initially we started off with like kind of like let's aggregate these underused compute resources, your PlayStation's GPU. I don't know if that's particularly where we're going to get a lot of value because like, AI has exploded, right? So it's made GPU costs, like you plot that's coming down over time, right? Because it's super competitive. So providers are basically heavily competing on price. I don't know how much margin are we really squeezing out by connecting all the PlayStations once you go through like the cost of acquisition and all these kind of things of getting users. I think most of the value is kind of, where Bittensor sits is kind of in that third layer, that model layer, and then agentic layer. Because what crypto in my mind is really good at doing is organizing disparate resources and having them all interoperate with like an incentive model effectively, right? So from creating AI models and doing the training, stuff like that, that's what I think Bittensor is really well geared towards is basically like finding granular incentive mechanisms for a particular data set even, right? Let's get something super fine-tuned for crypto data. Let's get a model super great for image generation of this one particular sector. And then same thing with the agents, right? The agents got to stitch together a bunch of different tools to use, and they've got to work across different platforms and stuff like that. And the best part about having the crypto rails is you can incentivize people to write little blocks of code that works with the agents. Everything's effectively open source. It starts to snowball each other as one person contributes, another person contributes. So these agents are going to get smarter and smarter over time. And as well as the protocols and stuff they use, they can pay each other. Like I don't have to pay Visa 30 cents, right, per transaction. I can just send Seth's robot $1 for doing a specialized process that it specializes in. So like once we get a huge network of agents and data and they're able to sort of effectively dynamically allocate what intelligence they want, right? What kind of specialized model, if my agent can hold some Bittensor and dynamically allocate that to different detail pools that have different specialized mechanisms for getting different models, like that's sexy, that's cool. And then maybe I think the application layer will largely look, because of just general web technology, is more traditional, right? But it absorbs the agents, it absorbs a lot of the intelligence created out. Long ramble there, but I see the biggest impact really in the agents and creating new models, and particularly the longer tail of models.
I just wanted to dive a little bit deeper into that, and maybe Seth will move over to you just because Dustin touched on this a little bit. What are the tangible benefits of having crypto infrastructure? What does that unlock? So we have, it could be validators, it could be, blockchain structures, it could be incentivization. What do you think are the actual, crypto value adds that you wouldn't be able to replicate as well with like a traditional model?
Yeah, maybe a couple things here. So one is like the coordination and incentive properties of crypto networks. So Dustin already talked about Bittensor a little bit, but but that's just a structural advantage of something like a Bittensor. If you look at like a subnet, it can get tau emissions, and that can like go towards these miners that need to host models or provide compute for some for some kind of application or service that sits on top of it. And that's just structurally, that's an advantage that you have with something like a Bittensor. It not only can make services cheaper, but it can also, if there's a large surplus and there's some kind of competitive dynamics at the miner level, you can also attract folks that have like specialized skills that can take advantage of that. That's kind of maybe like one example. There is structurally there's just these advantages that crypto tokens have and networks that are tied to those. The other is like what we're seeing with the recent like AI agent meme coin stuff is people are discovering like this, there is like a way, and maybe like a spectrum is forming, but there's a way to, incentivize and like monetize open source code, and specifically like AI agents or AI models, or like contributing to these frameworks. That's been historically a difficult problem in any kind of open source code or development, is figuring out how to monetize it. So right now, I think like we're seeing like the toyish kind of version of like there's a loose connection between open source frameworks and like the agent or the meme coin kind of things that are associated with these. But I think that's like the exciting part, is like now very serious teams are going to figure out how to connect those dots and like build very strong systems where there is like this connection between tokens and AI agent systems or frameworks or code, whatever that looks like, and really start to like build very interesting flywheels and like applications on top of that. So those are the two big areas that come to mind for me.
For me, I guess, I agree with everything you got there. Incentive mechanism is freaking huge. Being able to launch a token and bootstrap network effects like crazy, right? I think the other thing is it just generally tokenizing digital properties, right? I mean, we did this a little bit with the USD. We played the whole NFT game last cycle, but like you're going to start to be able to tokenize effectively intelligence in a way, right? Like an agent, like if you holding this agent's token somehow gets you access to whatever it's producing all the time in the future, right? Like that becomes a token, and now you start to build financial products around it. It has a real market value, right? Because like that's the thing that blockchain allows you to do, really, right? Is allows you to price these little niche assets on the AMM pools that you could never do before. Right. So now you've got a live market value of something niche, and you can once you aggregate it together, you start to build like these pretty interesting financial products, right? Like if you've got a whole basket of agents that are like smart, again, like in DeFi or something, right? We can start to approximate what the marginal value of that is. And if you're holding that on your balance sheet, you can see, okay, yeah, I've got labor cost effectively for this particular niche at whatever. And you can start to trade that and build like derivative markets around that, like taking price bets on a future demand of maybe a certain labor sector or intelligence later. And then, and obviously the agents can exchange digital value, even if it's a PDF, right, pointing to somewhere on Arweave or something. But I can pay for that piece of digital content or access to that, which is pretty interesting, right? You couldn't do that in Web 2, right? I know like Stripe rolled out their like sort of stuff to allow agents to pay each other, but it's not quite the same because you don't know what the guarantee of that's getting delivered, right? And that's what I think crypto is really good at, because you can do smart contracts, even for services, right? Like have agent go off and run, I'll prepay you, or put escrow something in a smart contract, allow that agent to go do some long running task and then come back and then, put their Arweave, let's say URL effectively in there, and then unlock the payment or something like that. So there's a lot of interesting things to do to make agents and AIs talk to each other and interoperate that you need blockchain, because that's just like, it's a global readable state that we can all trust. And that's the innovation.
There's been some discussion about this. I've seen a lot of people questioning online, like why people just automatically assume that agents and crypto are going to be tied together. And, I think it's not that agents will exclusively live on crypto rails. They'll probably just prefer to be on crypto rails. And as I mentioned before, we've started to see some of these things actually happen. And so do you buy into that idea, Dustin, now that we're talking about it?
I mean, yes and no. The naive one, which is like, oh, AIs are just going to want to be on crypto for make up a reason, right? Like, one, these things don't have agency unless I prompt it, right? And there's no, like, if you think about like all the stuff that's really even doing today, the tools it's using, like it's just using an API key. And the only reason you got that API key from Twitter is because you plugged your credit card into Elon product. So like there's no inherent driver per se that says like, oh, agents are going to prefer, like they just woke up one day and decided like, screw Stripe, we're going to go operate on Solana. I do think the fundamental properties over time will gravitate to doing that, because like I need to be able to trust your agent, especially if it's going to go run off and do like this 10-minute process. I want to be able to pay for it. And you can have history connected to these things, so you can see the payment history on chain. You can see like some sort of like kind of credit scores and stuff. So like the analogous, right? Like if we were to do this outside of crypto, everything would pretty much have to be on the same platform, right? Everything would have to be, and we would get back to that Web2 sort of like super value capture, and then bam, like, like it's, you're working in a monopoly again. I think the only way to really avoid that, to kind of have these multi-platform type situations that are with agents allowed to talk to each other using different models and all sorts of stuff, is really to use crypto. And I think over time we'll definitely get there because, like, I mean, just the human species alone, right, is like we all the value is kind of in the uniqueness and in the kind of like doing things a little bit better. So if you can have the discovery mechanisms and the payment mechanisms and stuff all on chain, I think that's going to be favored over time. Like I think Bittensor is a great example of how you could get there, right? If the agents are like able to like constantly incentivize like and fine tune their own specific model or something that's hosted on like, through a Bittensor subnet, like that's pretty interesting. And that's divergent from the sort of like one size fits all model, the OpenAI and Anthropics of the world. So I generally think we're going to look more like Star Wars clone, like not clones, but like more of the droids. They got their own personalities and stuff. And like, that's where a little bit more of the value is versus, the clone armies of AI agents.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Like, I don't know, maybe the Star Wars analogies, I don't know, those are pretty good. But yeah, like just from the platform perspective, having like a single source of truth that tells you how good if Dustin's built agents, right? And you can start to embed reputation and identity, like all the stuff that we've talked about with blockchains and that type of technology forever. That's when it really starts to shine, are these like autonomous things that just run and they do work and they start to live on it like the single platform. And the platforms just happen to be open, to where anyone can read and write to them. And as like an agent, that's also like, that's something I want. I want to be on like a very global, permissionless like platform where people can, pick me up and I can interact, on that type of scale. Whereas like Dustin was saying, if you like move to the Web2 world, you're that's a limiting factor is your platform that you're tied into. And then people have to trust, the database that's telling them how good this agent is at something and the reputation and how well it's worked. And you just kind of move back into this Web2 world, and we know there's a lot of things broken with reputation, identity, and how gameable that can be. So yeah, I think that's how I think of these things too, and like why they're going to prefer crypto. Of course, like crypto payments from like stablecoin and like using the rails, that's almost, I would say it's not quite as important as like the identity reputation that comes with being on a blockchain.
Yeah, no, it's not going to be the agents themselves revolting and choosing to move on chain. I think it's more so the developers kind of looking at the trade-offs of building on chain versus off chain and kind of recognizing over time that the value proposition of building on chain is just stronger. And so, yeah, Dustin, specifically, I wanted to ask you about like these new crop of AI agents, the agent KOLs, the sentient AI memes, whatever people are calling it these days on Twitter, the truth terminals, zero bros, AI ZPTs, XPTs. Is this like real tech? Like, do you think this is real tech? Do you think this actually matters? Or do you think that this is just kind of something that's been hyped up because crypto was sort of needing some sort of new mimetic narrative?
I mean, a little bit both, obviously, like any real answer. But yeah, I definitely say it's real, right? It's not like there's a reason like you can't just straight up copy Truth Terminal. Like no one can go home this weekend and just go copy it, right? It's because the guys like fine tuned some models and hosted it somewhere and, and done real things. Now, like, does it add a ton of value into things? Like, no, but like nothing really starts, like technology usually starts like from a historical perspective. It's like honestly just cute little shit. It starts off as toys and people playing on the internet, and it turns out to be like you just start to platformerize what's going on. Like I think it's pretty clear. Like the initial ones were really just experiments, and it turns out like there's and kind of going back to what I was saying, the value really is in that personality and drawing out that like non sort of like boxed in canned answer of stuff that like. So I do think there is some real value. I think we kind of do need to move into call it scaling it, platformerizing it, and making it more democratized in a way. Right now, it kind of is hacked together in the garage and let me show you my cool science experiment type of thing. But there's definitely some interesting stuff there that that you're going to want to use later, right? Just imagine taking Truth's like main framework or how he's customized models. And let's say they're running around in an autonomous world, a game engine, whatever. Like that's a lot more interesting from a gameplay perspective. And like, I think building characters in a big decentralized way like that, like where anybody can sort of decide and to figure out what the character is and operate in the big world is going to be way more engaging and better than like maybe a one game studio trying to build a bunch of characters. You know what I'm saying? Because like inherently you can have a lot more creativity in the masses. Like the surface area of creativity is just huge when it comes to crypto. So I think there's a lot of stuff that I can see where that goes. Do I think like we just getting excited about, you know, it posting on Twitter something funny a couple times is that's probably a little bit of a fad, but you can see the underlying properties of where that could get really interesting and where you kind of maybe just take that technology and then just broaden it for a lot more people.
Yeah, I remember whenever Dustin was still at Messari, right before he was leaving, one of the final things he was telling all the analysts was like, yeah, you probably have like 6 to 12 months before these AI agents are like basically doing your job for you. And I was like, yeah, that's like whatever. He's going off to build these things. He's probably a little biased. You know, AI XBT is like, it's got a ton of followers. I don't know where it's at now, but it's got a ton of followers. And it's because like it does a pretty decent job. There's like terrible things that it says that just aren't true, but it does make a lot of good calls. It'd be interesting maybe to do some analysis on how well it's done. But so yeah, I mean, I think like there's interesting tech behind that. I just, like Dustin was saying with Go or like Truth Terminal, like you can't just like go copy that right away. Like AI XBT probably has some very nice data pipeline set up and like particular models and lots of work put behind it to do what it's doing. Like it obviously has very dialed in knowledge of crypto. So yeah, I definitely think there's real tech there. And like going back to the toy comment, Dustin was saying, like, I think AI like 16Z is a perfect example of like, let's get it out there. Let's just get something out there for people to play with. And if people find it exciting and like motivating, they're going to contribute to it. And that's why you've seen it just like take off, you know, in like GitHub virality. So while there's like, you know, maybe like some parts that aren't too interesting or super novel or super sophisticated right now, that's just going to change, especially as like it continues like this flywheel of like a loosely connected coin to it. And you know, more eyeballs get attracted to it from that type of mechanism too. More people are going to try to contribute to it.
I'm curious, Dustin, since you've looked into, you know, Autonomous and you've written reports about Wayfinder, some of these other AI agent protocols slash platforms, why you think Virtuals and Eliza and some of the platforms that are kind of taking the attention now, why they've taken off and kind of become the base for some of these new agents. Any reason in particular you think?
I mean, they're live. I mean, they're live. I mean, I know Olas has had some stuff out there. Yeah, I mean, having something that people can touch. I mean, if you break down kind of like what the appeal is, most mass products are in a way consumery products, right? So the virtuals especially, right? All of them is like it gave a surface area for people to engage with, right? Twitter, I think, was kind of the big, where they had good tweets and stuff. I think that part was missing, and it was a little bit more engineer-esque focus on the OAuth side. Here's a framework and build some agents, but a little bit less on the like that end goal product vision. Here's exactly what we wanted to kind of be doing. You know, Wayfinder, you know, kind of just released their alpha recently, but broadly wasn't alive. Like very interesting design, obviously, but what captures attention is people being able to see stuff like, oh man, look at that, and show their friends, right? Like there's a social element to it, there's a consumer element to it. And I think that's where people got excited, right? Is they saw stuff that like that. There's no way a robot just said that, right? And that sparks their interest, and it kind of just snowballs. Like you see that, oh my, like because you could see this time, like if you were following this online, it's like, oh, it said funny tweet, and then like you know you discover a couple of days later, it's like, oh my god, it's paying other people, or oh my god, it's doing this, right? So people just discovered that doing things in the real world that they could see and whatever follow along with. And that just helps people create a story about it. You get that mimetic exposure, you know, versus when you're doing everything more from an engineer perspective, it's tough to get that kind of emotional attachment that kind of snowballs into the mimetic side of things. And if you could just sum up 2024 in large anyway, it's been that mimetic meme coin sort of driven world anyway. So like, it's not particularly surprising that like that was the avenue where this stuff got popular.
Like to that point, like if you go to Wayfinder and you work wherever their team is working, they're probably seeing like super exciting stuff every day, right? So it's not like stuff's not happening. It's just like whenever you are building things internally, you know, compared to like the AI 16Z example, like I think is on the other end of the spectrum, you just don't have like the scale of the same excitement, right? So like that's just like one benefit of like, even though it might not be perfect or like you're letting control of something, that's what, you know, you get from a benefit of open sourcing your code. And then something too, it doesn't really talk about this too much, but like, you know, Wayfinder doesn't have a token, right? Or, you know, it doesn't have a token yet. I mean, OLAS was already at a fairly high valuation, or has been throughout this year, compared to like something like a virtuals. And then, most of the other ones we've talked about haven't had a token for most of this year. So you're like starting from zero, and people like shiny new things, especially in the AI world now, that have low valuations. And so that's another attention attractor. So you like bundle all that up together and you get where we're at, I think.
Yeah, I think I'm way more likely to care about something if I have bags. So, like one thing we talked about in the theses too is that it's almost like right now, like these tokens, these meme coins, are kind of acting as like tokenized expressions of fandom, and so you're almost betting on these agents to take mind share versus these other agents that are coming up. And so, like we saw when Zero Bro dropped his like first Spotify album, and that's not like anything particularly novel. I think like AI has always been able to create music, good music. But when he dropped like it dropped like the Spotify album, like the token pumped, and then like a couple weeks later, like Truth Terminal put out its own Spotify album, and so it sort of speeds up this arm race, which helps move the tech forward as well. I think maybe just the last question here on agents for both of you. What are some of the more like interesting applications of AI agents on crypto that you're excited for that we may not have really seen kind of materialize yet?
That's a good question, Dustin.
Yeah, I'm a little biased, but I would say I would want to get like we've done a lot, call it in the entertainment side of the agents, right? With funny tweets, the music albums, whatever it is. I'd really like to see us get into that doing functional work, and I really like it in the sense of like, can we get it to where you're starting to take human labor out of companies and like agents are going off to do work for you, real work, right? Whether it's, I know we've got some that are trading meme coins and try to make money that way, but like, can we start to aggregate information? Because AI is really great at basically disseminating across a large data set, a huge ingestion pipeline of stuff, and then synthesizing exactly what you want and need and moving information effectively in the supply chain to where it needs to go. I'd like to get to where we've got, let's say, Sonny, you got an agent out there and you can coach it and sort of give the things like that it should be looking at all the time. And it can go off and do work for you, whether it's do like bounties of stuff, kind of like maybe just get subscription products to kind of like give your intelligence to other agents effectively, like other agents subscribing to your agent, which is effectively just a subscription to you, right? And the stuff that you do, right? Because to me, that really changes the way that we do work broadly, if that makes sense. Like you think what the traditional like Fortune 500 job is right now is you go onto Outlook, you answer some emails, you put your information into the PowerPoint, you update your Excel. And all what you're really doing is reading that feed of information, knowing what's in your head. You go get your files out of SharePoint. You're basically just moving blocks of intelligence and giving your opinion of stuff. But you got to be online to do that, right? You got to be like sitting in front of the computer and like if your boss emails you, email them back, Slack them back, whatever it is. I think we can start to change the nature of work to be pretty async. Like if you can like start to get your opinion about everything documented and transcribed and owned by and operating into your agent, and it can like effectively just work for you while you're off doing something. I think that would be pretty interesting and actually do real work, right? Like I'm not talking just bullshit or make a song even though it's cool, but like can we start to get like productive capital effectively out there in workforce with the agents? I think that's where the real nut is. I think that you crack that nut, that's people, it becomes less of that toy. Oh, cute, the crypto bros got some, AI meme coins or whatever it is. It's like, oh shit, like we've raised hundreds of millions of dollars and we haven't done that. Like that's where you need to get to. And I think having the long tail models within crypto is a great place to maybe crack that nut. I think having that long tail exposure, like of open source code and incentives to contribute into it, where you can start to grow that stuff a lot faster than you can in like a single office in SF, right? And I think that's where the bet is. I think that's what I'm probably most excited about is people trying to do productive things.
So for crypto specifically, like what are some productive things? Is it just like making money, like trading, yield farming?
A little bit, but if you take thesis that you're going to tokenize more things, right? So if you presume that most digital infrastructure gets tokenized in a way, both like literally through the files themselves, right? There's a tokenized representation of those. You got also the tokenized representation of services work. Even like you take Bittensor as an example of that, right? Where if I can acquire this detail token and that sort of like grants me access to inference capabilities over time, or like effectively fine tuning capabilities over time, and I hold that, that's me effectively of, like paying them for their services. So like in a way that does it look like trading tokens? Yes. But like if you're trading access to like work tokens, like, like I think that's normal. And that's like how everything should work. Because like you need to be able to tokenize and value those digital properties. You need to tokenize and value your services. And tokens are the connecting tissue, the connecting infrastructure for all of that. So yes, does it look like trading tokens? Absolutely. But what's underneath of those tokens and what those tokens grant you is where the magic sauce is. I think that's where we really need to get to. Seth, go ahead. You can say something.
Yeah, just to like add on to that. So like within the Bittensor world, we've talked to a couple teams that are like thinking along these lines. And there's a bunch of problems in Bittensor, but like one is just like core tooling and infrastructure for teams that are building subnets, running miners, and running validators. There's a lot of like missing tools and gaps, but also just like there's teams that have figured this stuff out and they have knowledge of how to do this stuff properly. So if you could like build a model like a software engineer, basically, right? That's an AI agent that could like simply start out by doing like very simple pull requests to like help subnet owners get their subnets running, help them build their miners, their validator, like help them design incentive mechanisms. There's like a bunch of like deep knowledge stuck in like a few minds of Bittensor. So if you could like start to get that into like the software layer, basically, you can start with very simple things, like with an agent that can like, add simple code to simple, PRs or repos. But eventually you get, to where like Dustin's saying, that thing becomes very powerful, understands incentive mechanism design, how to build subnets. You could tokenize that basically, and you can use tokens to access it and kind of like a bandwidth model, right? So yeah, that's an interesting area that I think there's probably a few teams working on that right now.
So let's move into Bittensor, because Seth, obviously you've been doing a ton of work there now. So, first question to you about Bittensor. Let's start with the good. Why do you think it's soaked up so much attention? Why is the Tau number going up? Why do you think Bittensor deserves to be the quote unquote leader of the crypto and AI sector?
Yeah, I mean, Bittensor's been around for a good while now. So an advantage of being an early mover doesn't always have to play out that way, but it has in this case. So I think that's probably number one. People have just associated with Bittensor with AI for a while, and there's just like this loose connection there. But also just the nature of Bittensor. Like we talked earlier about looking at the AI crypto stack, and there's like compute and data and cognitive layers and all this stuff. Bittensor like doesn't really try to go after one of those particular layers, right? Like Sami Kassab, who also worked at Messari, like he has this visual where it's like, he breaks down the stack and it's like all these companies and protocols at individual layers, and like Bittensor just like spans the whole stack. So really, like if you zoom out of Bittensor, it's just an incentive mechanism, for people to build things on these subnets. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be AI related, but that's what people have found it to be useful for. So I think that's like probably two things there. It's, it's been early and it's got a very strong incentive structure for people to build open source software on top of. And that's attracted some group of AI folks. So, I think there's probably like an initial period where people realized like how much US dollar value was like basically subsidizing these subnets, right? And it's not chump change, right? So if you have a skill set and you have some free time, like if you're working at one of those corporate jobs where you're just answering emails a few hours a week, and you have skills, you can come to Bittensor and monetize those. Another part of the community there, which is quite a bit different than like what you find in other crypto focused communities, is there's a lot of just AI focused people that don't, maybe not even enjoy some parts of the crypto world, especially like the more degenerate side of things. And for a lot of people, that's refreshing. Try to use crypto in a very specific scoped model to help build open source, AI software. So I think that's kind of like the third thing is to the first two, it's attracted a good group of people interested in building AI systems, kind of like up and down the stack and figuring out how to make that work in an open source world.
And then I think let's dive into maybe just the primary concern for Bittensor, which is sort of this mismatch between Bittensor and Tau, and then all of its different subnets, which are each doing their own different things. They have their own incentives. There's no revenue share between the two. There's nothing keeping talent from leaving from any of these subnets. And so these are sort of things that have been thrown at Bittensor as major concerns. So I guess for both of you, like Dustin and Seth, on a scale of like extremely concerning, might kill the protocol, to like these are probably pretty addressable. Like where do you think these complaints fall?
maybe start with Dustin, and I'll push back if he says anything that's too out of line for me.
Yeah, normally I love to love some good FUD. But no, in this case, I don't. I don't think anything's protocol killing. There are obviously things that you can develop around it. If you think detail is super sexy, like the token thing. I mean, what's your other option? What are you going to go raise a fat round from VCs, and then the problem you have with that, right? Like if you were to, let's say, be sub DAO versus go launch my own token, you got to be damn good at what you do, because like in order for you to really sell your token, you need a market for it. You need to create a market for it. You need to create a lot of interest for it, and there's a huge go to market basically risk there, right? Because if you don't create a market for it, you're never going to sell the damn thing and effectively raise what you need to raise and be operational. I think it's what Bittensor, like particularly in this like sub DAO model, are particularly good at, right? Like you're the token that's got to absorb effectively the sell pressure of everything is Tau, and that thing's priced in the billions, right? So like if you're a middle market, even high-ish market protocol, like that can absorb a lot of flows for you. So you don't need to worry about effectively like launching a token and then like what the hell do I do with the damn thing and get markets for it. Like you can actually just focus on getting code, I think, running. The main thing that I particularly, at least in the current view of the world, is like really the mismatch between the cost and the revenue side, and I'll explain what that means. Like all the revenue in the system currently comes from Tau emissions, and then the detail model comes from both the Tau and the detail emissions, right? So like there's a flat deterministic sort of revenue stream that's obviously priced in US dollar, which will vary up and down a little bit, but the applications on top don't particularly have that, right? Like if I have a big spike in my usage and I can't pay you more effectively, there's a disjointed, like there's no payment mechanism on there for me to pay for more usage. There's no thing that ties in a very like guaranteed sense that you're going to scale up your infrastructure underneath the hood from the miner's perspective that's going to scale with my application. And also in general, like I don't know how production grade a lot of the stuff is, right? Like even the fancy, some of the Web2 stuff, like, hey, come use our super fast llama model or whatever it is. Like it looks good. It tests well, but like you go to sit there and you're like, what, you got 500 tokens a minute or something, crazy low limits on stuff. You got a 10,000 contacts limit, whatever it is. So like, I don't know, like, is the infrastructure going to be ready for, like, call it running production workloads of inferencing and training? I think you can definitely get there on some of the stuff. I don't know about everything, right? I don't think you can totally wipe out an open AI or whatever. I think most of the value, in my opinion, is on the long tail of models and customizing it, and like having even agents having like autonomous ability to sort of allocate into different detail pools and really treat it like a unit of work, right? It's like, it's basically buying services. It's like, if you can have it code up the incentive mechanism and say like, hey, this is what I want you to do, work on this and deliver stuff in this format, and I'll check it like this. You just run the code and you'll get paid. Like if the agents can define services contracts like that, that's pretty sexy. And I think like that's where we need to get to. We're obviously just not there yet. But it's by far the best protocol, I think, or at least the closest one to something like that. And then the agents, don't have to worry about starting your own token per se, because the Tau token like kind of allows you to bootstrap a lot of that. You don't need to start your own network and all that kind of nonsense.
Yeah, I think a lot of that's fair. Maybe like to go through a couple points there. As far as like the production readiness of some of the infrastructure, I think that's probably true for like the majority of these subnets. And there is like almost a bifurcation between subnets. Some are just like, especially right now, they're more like R&D labs, right? They're not even thinking about like, how do I productionize this? Like, how do I commercialize it? How do I let validators like think about how to build applications? Like, we're just trying to like do some very fundamental R&D and use Tau incentives and emissions to fund that ourselves. So that's like one thing to note. But for the ones that are trying to be more service oriented, what I've found like kind of interesting talking to some of these people is that a lot of them that are subnet owners like got started by like having an idea of like, this is what we want to build, or like, this is the thing that we want to do on the infrastructure side. And they come from the AI world. And then what you end up finding is that as a subnet owner, you need to be more focused on like the game theoretic design. Like Bittensor, like if you talk to the Bittensor crowd, it is very adversarial. Like as soon as you start a subnet, the miners, you can't think idealistically. Like if there's something wrong with your incentive design and your subnet can get wrecked, you have to assume miners are going to wreck you and take all the Tau that's coming to the subnet, and then it's going to get a bad reputation, and you're not going to be able to come back from that. A good miner might help you out and tell you like, hey, this is broken. This is how I think you could fix it. But that's what you might find is like a subnet owner is you need to your mind needs to be totally into the game theory and how to make sure validators are doing what you want them to do and miners are doing what you want them to do. And that's, I think people find that's a much more difficult problem than what you might think on the surface. So it takes a lot of thinking and like time and iteration. Stuff breaks all the time, especially with new subnets. So that's like one thing I think that might slow the progress down a little bit of like, people looking at on the outside in, and also just like very ambitious teams kind of find that as well. And then also to your point, Dustin, on like the kind of like looseness or like maybe non-existent connection between like application revenue outside of Bittensor and like miners deep down the stack. I think that's true. I think there's ways that teams are trying to get around this by like, miners kind of prioritizing validators that have larger stake in Tau, which, through that larger stake and kind of like viewing it as like a bandwidth constraint, almost like stake weighted quality of service on Solana, like that kind of concept, you can start to gain more emissions to your subnet. And as a miner, that just means more income to you as well. So there's ways to like loosely connect these things, but from like a very protocol, smart contract, automated perspective, it is still like very loose. Like there's another subnet that's like monetizing at the application layer through a front end, and they're doing like a revenue share across validators based on their stake. And that's great, but there's nothing that defines that within the protocol, right? It's just because this subnet owner is choosing to model their subnet this way. So there's a lot of work I still think that needs to go into that. So I'll give you that point as well.
I think maybe getting into dynamic Tau, one thing that you've told me before, Seth, is that you think that with dynamic Tau and with each of these subnets kind of fleshing out their own tokens, that you think they'll start acting more like hedge funds, I think is the word that you used. Can you maybe expand on that? First of all, is that true? I hope I'm not misquoting you. Maybe that was another Seth. But if it's true, expand on what that means.
Yeah. I don't think the subnet owners, the validators could maybe start to think of themselves as like more hedge fundy. Yeah, maybe just like back up a little bit and set the context. So with dynamic Tau, every subnet has its own token. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And like these things are kind of like stored in like a Uniswap liquidity pool, and it's paired with Tau, that token. But like even back up a little bit further, the way everything works right now on the network is validators are not like the typical like proof of stake validators. They're like these entities that run software for every subnet based upon how much stake of how much Tau they have and how much Tau they've got nominated or delegated to them. They get to kind of like point the emission, hose to subnets, right? So that's basically the way it works. So I can say like, I want 5% of my weight to go towards this subnet and 10% here and so on. So that's kind of how validators work. And the idea like right now is like there's no risk involved at all. There's like none of my Tau as a validator. I have nothing at risk in doing this job. But also there's no way for like the market to penalize me if I make a bad allocation, right? If Dustin has a very poor subnet that doesn't produce a very valuable commodity, but I like Dustin, so I just give him 5% allocation. There's nothing that like slaps me from a market perspective that says that's bad. Like Bittensor doesn't need what he's producing. That's bad. So that's what dynamic Tau is trying to change, is like how emissions are directed on the network and remove it from like this kind of validator entity directing everything based on how they feel about things to like more of a market-based approach. So yeah, that's the idea behind dynamic Tau. And as far as validators are concerned, now they do have some risk, because if you want to do work as a validator on a subnet, you have to take your Tau and swap it into this subnet token. And if you're familiar with like Uniswap v2 or Uniswap pools, that original Tau that you swapped into that dynamic Tau token, that 1,000 Tau, say, if you go to swap back out later down the road, that you might not get 1,000 Tau, it might be priced less. So there's this very explicit risk now in doing work on a subnet and participating as a validator. So you need to think about liquidity and like which subnets you think are valuable in some sense of the word. Yeah, and so I think it mirrors a lot of the way like a fund or like a liquid fund could historically, or like, especially from an on-chain perspective, works.
Dustin, are you a fan of dynamic Tau?
Yeah, I mean, it's an upgrade over the kind of the plutocratic system you have right now, where it's like it's really tough for the towel to change hands, and because it kind of market based, but not really right now, right? Where it's like the towel is this voting weighting machine, right? Where like if you weight down the scale more, it gets more of the emissions. But there's no, its system doesn't incentivize future growth effectively. So you need to have a little more risk on the line. So I definitely like it, and it really opens up the number of pools. I think it's fixed at like what 64. It grows a lot. I don't know how many sub DAOs or whatever there are right now, Seth.
It's in the 60s, yeah.
Yeah, 60s. Yeah. So like if you can open up that number a lot, right, and make it a lot more permissionless, particularly as the agents start writing a little bit more of the code and the tooling. I think the tooling's probably got to get a lot better in that ecosystem, for everybody to operate a little faster. But that the long tail of stuff, I think, is probably the most interesting to me. You can open up that number of who can get the emissions and stuff a little bit more. Anybody can create tokens, right? It becomes a lot more like permissionless, and that's where the innovation really is, right? Like we've seen it, right? We were talking about the agent stuff earlier, right? Like some guy literally just goes off and fine tunes a model and starts posting cool shit on Twitter. Like that's what got people excited. You need to have the barriers to entry, maybe not too low, right? That you don't want to have like pump and dump type stuff, but like lower than whatever it is, $1 million or whatever it is to start a subnet right now, just because that opens up the innovation and allows people to experiment with the incentive mechanism. Because it's like as Seth was getting at, right? It's a hard problem, but it's not an unsolvable problem, right? And it might be someone that's not maybe the heavy AI engineer is actually just really good at incentive mechanism stuff, right? Like all the DeFi guys really built incentive mechanisms. It's the same thing, right? It's like it just makes sure that there's bigger penalties for doing bad things than you can in the protocol. But are they like the financial wizards on Wall Street, right? Like writing like crazy algos? No, right? They're just better at writing incentive mechanisms, and they created the $1 billion protocol, right? I think you can do something similar in Bittensor, but I think you got to lower the cost to start something effectively, and then that'll open up the door for the guys that maybe or girls, whoever, that are maybe not the crazy AI engineer, but they attract them, right? If you got an interesting enough design, and like particularly in the detail model, there's financial upside for me kind of going in there early, and that's the beauty of it. You don't have that right now. It's kind of just it's like a high school voting game right now, and you want to get to where there's financial upside, there's financial risk, because that's where you get real value, real players, and interesting stuff.
I was just going to say, like right now too, if you are wanting to start a new subnet, there is like, it's such a high barrier to entry. Like just alone to like register a subnet, I don't know what it is now, but like recently it was like 2,500 or 2,800 TAL. And so like Dustin was saying, like that's in the millions. Like most people just don't have that much TAL laying around. So that's one hurdle. And then you also need validators and miners to come onto your network. And without like that subnet token, as a miner, I need to know like all the costs that it's going to take me to run my infrastructure, I'm going to make up for in TAL emissions. So I need to know that you as the subnet owner are going to get validators to like vote and put weight onto the subnet so that I can eat. So there's like a lot of these weird dependencies, and like there's some
it's a popularity contest.
Yeah, and it's there's, if you look at the validator list, it's quite power law structured. So it's just this weird kind of dynamic at this point. And then once dynamic TAL comes, which is still under development, but I think it'll drastically reduce the costs to spin up a subnet. But it will also, like on the other side of there's also clear financial upside for miners, for example, to join a subnet early and start doing work for them. And it also changes how subnet owners have to think about things, right? They don't just need to go to validators now to get weights. They really need to like market themselves like any other kind of protocol would do on crypto. So lots of interesting stuff that'll come.
Yeah, maybe to try and source some alpha, since you are working closely with these subnets and of course working closely with Sammy. I think one of the biggest problems is people don't really know what these subnets are and what they do. They just never taken the time to go in and unearth like what all these what teams are in all these different subnets. But now that there's a token, something we've talked about earlier, power of providing potential financial upside, maybe people start paying attention. What do you think are some of the most interesting subnets that you've seen or that you think have the most opportunity to capture some attention?
Maybe like I'll pick a couple out here. One that's like, or a couple that are more in the R&D camp, like the deep R&D camp that I was referring to earlier, and then ones that are more like trying to be service oriented yesterday and get customers. So like on the R&D side, there's a couple subnets that are working on building distributed training frameworks. So like you've mentioned News Research and Prime Intellect, and even Jensen, like these guys have attracted a lot of attention because they are building, decentralized training networks, which from an open source model development perspective, that's like the very foundation pillar that you need to develop these things. You need some way to orchestrate computers, GPUs to do work. So there's a couple of those subnets. It's subnet 3 and 38. So if you go to talpil.ai, which is a great website, Sammy built with some other folks, you can find links to those subnets there if you want to see those. So those are like distributed training subnets, very early. I think they were registered in like September and October this year. So like just getting started. But those two are pretty exciting to me. And then maybe like further into like the service kind of ready model. So like subnet 4 is Targon. So they've done a lot of work on just like building out a lot of the tooling that subnets need, which, I think everyone in the ecosystem is thankful for, but also just in particular for their subnet, their miners host all kinds of different models, and they're open source models. There's all kinds of different models that they host on the back end. And so like, if Dustin's building like his AI agent application and he needs to tap into some LLMs, he could go to that subnet at this point and access those services. So I don't know off the top of my head, like how they compare from like a pricing perspective to other folks, or from like if it matches Dustin's like SLAs, does he need super high reliable uptime and maybe like some additional services tapped in? Those are questions like I think these subnet teams are thinking about is like how to layer on additional services to their core offerings. But subnet 4 is quite far along, and they built a pretty awesome product. I think like they sort of frame it as like similar to like Open Router as far as like what they're modeling their product after. So that's a shout out to them.
Last question here. We have a looking forward section of our theses. So I guess looking ahead to 2025 and beyond, if you want to theorize on what happens afterwards, what are some of your predictions, maybe some hot takes for what you think will happen in crypto and AI?
We get some kind of like big AI lab or big AI company, or like even just, someone big in the AI world. Maybe it's like AI adjacent. They have some announcement where they're either like launching their own network or tapping into like an existing network. And they have like a very clearly defined reasoning and framework for why they're doing this and why crypto enables something that is missing from their platform or their company. That seems like it should be pretty close on the horizon. So I would expect that like in 2025. So maybe that's one thing. Maybe like another, I think a lot of these distributed training teams, like within Bittensor and also Prime Intellect and some of these others, they're really focused on like scaling up their model size. And then I think the next thing will be actually like post-training and like fine-tuning and doing the stuff that you need to like a pre-trained model to make it state-of-the-art. So I expect one of these teams to deliver like a very state-of-the-art from like objective benchmarks and performance levels, probably by the end of next year. And I don't think it'll be like a trillion parameter model. It'll probably be something on the smaller size. But yeah, I expect that to happen this year too. So maybe that's a little bit of a hot take.
I think maybe on the fine-tuning side, on the decentralized training, I don't know if we're that fast, like state of the art. Yeah, I would just go like mother of all bull markets, if you will, not like immediately because everybody's a genius right now. But I think that AI just has a special sauce for a little bit of everybody. Like your retail capital can see it, because I think most of these things are really driven by fear, and as much as they are greed, if not more. And seeing AI like, oh, it could take my job, it could go out and make me money is the greed side, but I think it's mostly in the fear. Like if you think about the last big bull market, right, 21, 22, it was like the debasement of the dollar, the dollar's going to shit. And that's really what drove a lot of stuff. I think it's basically the AI is going to replace us. Let's buy the intelligence platforms, the agents themselves. And I can see how that crescendos into a massive market, right? Like I don't think like 100 billion counts sounds crazy. Doesn't seem too crazy. I think like, some of those agent platforms, like you saw last last cycle, Uniswap, whatever is it, 20, 30, 40, whatever, crazy numbers, Aave, et cetera. Like, and it collectively, like, you have big numbers in TVL, but it's a lot of like kind of its own platform tokens growing that number. So like from an ejected users, like you do some like users, like probably got like a few thousand people taking out loans on Aave. But like your $1 billion platform, I think you can see something similar happen with the agents, particularly like we saw this with the NFTs. Like people were like, oh, it's JPEGs on the internet. And then it blows up and you're selling these damn things for millions of dollars. I think you'll see the same thing with agents in some capacity because it's just there, right? You can tell yourself stories of how this shit is going to be like revolutionized. It's going to take your job. It's going to run away and it's going to make you all this money. It's going to live, you can imagine those like financial, I don't want to call them financial illiterate, but like, maybe not as like whatever, but they're going to see it and be like, that's my ticket to whatever, right? And we just in this society of kind of these big bets, like just look at gambling revenues, like everything is on these kind of like asymmetric outcomes, what people are going for. And I just think you can see how it crescendos into from the retail perspective, but also the, call it your bigger capital perspective, right? Like buying the infrastructure, investing in the training of these things. I think we're crypto, like if we could sort of just detach a little bit and sort of like win that little argument and become like that really crisp marketing message of like, why does it have to be on crypto versus everywhere else? I don't think we're there yet. Even within crypto, I don't think we even have the answer. But if we get across that hurdle, I think it's, off the walls. Like if we get decentralized training and it's just operating faster, we're doing very niche models hosted all around the world, and it's doing cooler stuff. It's releasing faster than OpenAI can, particularly with regulations. It's in the EU because they're blocking damn everything, right? Like you can start to see like how crypto incentives are making us move really, really fast, faster than you can as a centralized company, both from the call it the model side, but even on the agent productivity side, where that just people like lose their shit, and we're at 100 billion tau or whatever it is, pick your platform. I don't think all the platforms that will succeed. I think you'll have like someone obviously that launches like Q1 be one of the better performers. I think the thing you need to remember is that AI allows you to code fast as living hell now, right? Like you used to have like this like 9-ish month development cycle from like idea to product for the most part. You can go super fast. You can change, you can iterate, you can launch your Spotify album, whatever the hell it is, in a matter of weeks. And I think like you should just re-rate how fast you think stuff can come out. But yeah, I would say probably 2025, just big blow up the top and retire, go home, live on an island, provided you sell, obviously. Because it'll be a lot of bullshit. It'll be the same story as always. Euphoria, change the world, bullshit under the hood for some of this stuff. Don't be wrong, there's gonna be some real tech and real players in there. But like with any technology that's open like that, you're gonna have the incentives are there for bullshit. And it'll happen.
Yeah, there's no emotional ceiling for AI. Are you backing any of these agent tokens? Is there one that you like in particular?
Right now, no. It got to be where everybody was in them. So just trader Dustin's like, I don't need to be in those anymore. So no, I do like. I can never say I'm like dyslexic as all hell. But Zebra, I don't know how you say it. I like it. He's developing probably some of the faster stuff. Virtuals has probably some of the better, or at least a more generalized platform of stuff. Or at least where like from a token perspective, right? You can see clearly where the token flows are bullish for the token value. You need to see like which. I think the next layer is crossing some sort of productive layer, right? I think we kind of had our yams finance phase of the world, where we kind of we're having fun, we're doing some stuff, and it's like you can see the tidbits of interesting stuff there. I think the next phase will be, okay, let's take those interesting elements and productize them away that we can tell a bigger story, right? Like it's hard to tell a massive story around shit posting on Twitter, right? Like from a capital allocator perspective, it's like, okay, great. How big is that market? But if we can tell a bigger story, like, the future of France or whatever it is, and have some, call it perceived legitimacy around it, that's where we need to get to, right? So I'm really looking for something like that, right? Where like story's big, team's good, and it all just fits. I think we're kind of in the meme stage, and that's not my game at the moment. So
it's just funny you compare this to like the yam finance and like DeFi summer like times, because that lasted for I don't know how long the time span is, but like months to a year, you could argue. Whereas like the AI agent stuff, like I think Goat, probably started it, like the token
September, October. Yeah.
I mean, I think mid-October is probably like really whenever Goat started happening, and that was like the first one. And now we've like, I guess sped run a whole cycle-ish, worth of things. You're saying like with AI agent meme coins, at this point it's December 10th. So I think I was also thinking that too, that we probably have like everyone's sick of the reply guy things, AI agents, and I think there's probably still like a little more incremental things that people will get excited about and have attention towards. It'll probably last a little bit longer maybe than what I initially expected. But I agree with your like overall point there, and there's probably a lot of teams that haven't even launched yet that are like seeing all this and the gears are going in their head. And instead of launching in Q3 or Q4 of next year, it'll be like Q1 whenever you see these things, because of what you said too on the how quickly you can iterate now from a coding perspective, but also just seeing like these open source teams and the success that they're seeing and the virality and attention that they're getting. Like that's just motivation to get your shit out there and get going.
We could probably go on about this all day, but we are running out of time. So thank you, Dustin and Seth, for tapping in. Thank you to anyone who is listening. Check out our other podcast episodes on the 2024 thesis and go actually read our 2024 Messari theses. And yeah, that's a wrap.
Awesome. Thanks for having us, man.
Yeah, thanks, Sonny. It was good talking with you.